So I don't know what is going on. You know what I mean? Like, like there's clearly something wrong with my. There's clearly something wrong with my like webcam. Like I don't know what's. Let me try something. Standard. Why is Google Chrome using my camera? Your camera is reporting that it is blocked or turned off by a switch or button on your device. Please unblock it oh, okay. Um what? I don't your you can always click on the pencil icon. Okay. What are you looking to help with? Manage camera settings, troubleshoot camera. I don't know. Mm, let me see. Your app is using the camera now. Settings changed here or in the app will affect the app and camera preview below. Okay. Your camera is reporting that it is blocked or turned off by a switch or button on your device. Okay. I don't know which button. I'm gonna just start pressing buttons, bro. What's this? No. Okay. What about that? No, that's definitely not it. What about that? No, not that either. I don't know, dog. What button or like what is it talking about? Like, okay, let me go to camera privacy options. Camera access on on Google Chrome currently in use. How though? Okay, hold on. What if I do this? Okay, no, hold on. I don't want to do that. Okay, hold on. Oh my goodness. How did this happen? Uh uh-huh. Uh-huh. Cameras, integrated webcam. Like what button? Like I don't know what it's talking about. I mean, my cat was sitting on it earlier and shit. No, not this. Okay, not that. Okay, annotate live on your screen. Quick markup let you draw on your screen in real time. I don't want to do that. Recording area. Rectangle window. Okay. But like I don't understand. Like, I don't know what like I did. Let me see. Okay, I don't. What does that have to do with me? Uh-huh. No, it's not that. Let's look at your common issues. Okay. Oh my god, it would be an AI fucking generator. Okay, check for driver issues, troubleshoot the camera on the settings for the camera, look for troubleshoot options, look at you through common issues and help identify any problems. I mean, I was already there. Okay, I'm gonna hit troubleshoot, like it said. And let me hang this up. Okay, we'll cut off of there. Come on, find the thing. I don't get it. Okay, well, you know what? Fuck it. No, I didn't get a new camera. It's just like the built-in camera on the laptop. But for whatever reasons, it's not fucking working. So, like, I mean, but you can like hear me and shit, right? Um, okay, okay. What's up, y'all, man? Like, I don't know what I should do. Yeah, I'm gonna have to end this. I gotta figure this out. But fuck, hey, dude, embarrassing. All right, we got to figure it out. Let's just get into it. I hope my sounds well enough. Turn my hat this way. Okay. Chapter 1, linguistic fallacies. Here's what it looks like. Well, you can't see it because it's fucking blur shit. Maybe I can edit the blur. Let's see. Customization. I don't know. I guess never mind the customization. But anywho, let's go. So we'll start with the fallacy of division. This is known as the whole to part fallacy. This argument states that because the whole has a certain characteristic, the parts that make up the whole must also have the same characteristic. In other words, the fallacy of division claims the whole is always the same as its parts. The whole, referred to, might be a specific group of people, an institution, a body of literary work, or just about any other ensemble made up of individual components, pieces, or parts. For example, the Dodgers have an excellent team this year. Therefore, we can safely conclude that every player on the team is outstanding. Example 2, the chocolate cake tastes sweet. Therefore, all of its ingredients must also be sweet. Or example number 3, Berkeley is a very liberal city. Stan lives in Berkeley. Therefore, he must be an extremely liberal person. Example number 4. Republicans are in favor of immigration reform. Mr. Thomas is a staunch Republican. Therefore, Mr. Thomas must be in favor of immigration reform. It is clear the parts or ingredients of a whole do not always have the same characteristics as the whole itself. When one commits the fallacy of division, one erroneously uses the characteristics of the whole to define or categorize its constituents. Such an argument strays far from clarity, making assumptions about the parts without critically investigating them or considering them individually. There's also like another example I thought of was like water is wet. You know what I mean? But like hydrogen isn't wet, oxygen isn't wet, but you get a couple of them shits together and they produce something that we have described as wet, although none of its constituent parts were wet themselves. So, hold on, man. Let me get a fucking. Hold on. I got a blunt. Says, what book is this? It's called Informal Logical Fallacies by Jacob E. Van Vliet. Next, we have the fallacy of composition. This fallacy is the opposite of the fallacy of division. It's something referred to as the part to whole fallacy. The fallacy of composition involves an assumption that the characteristics of the parts are identical to the characteristics of the whole. In other words, the whole is assumed to be composed of identical parts. For example, the woman who rear-ended me was Asian. Therefore, all Asians must be terrible drivers. Example number 2, some life forms exhibit signs of sentience. Therefore, all life forms must be sentient. Example 3, the chocolate cake recipe calls for salt. It must be a salty tasting cake. Example number 4, the terrorists who attacked us were Muslim. Therefore, all Muslims are terrorists. These examples are incredibly poor arguments. If one ingredient of a recipe has a certain taste, this doesn't entail the final product will taste like the ingredient. Likewise, simply because a member of a group or a class is a certain way, this doesn't necessarily mean the entire group or class is the same. Members of religions, political parties, and ethnic groups are all extremely diverse. However, due to this fallacy, stereotypical ways of thinking are common. We must be vigilantly aware of stereotypes and other fallacies of composition. Dade is wearing a black shirt. He wasn't wearing a shirt the last stream I watched. Therefore, he must only own this black shirt. Fucking A. Oh, let me mute this. Sorry about that. All right. Next, we have vagueness. Vagueness is not an informal logical fallacy. It is, however, perhaps the most common element found in unclear communication. A word or phrase is vague if it is imprecise or lacks specific clarifying details. Consider this example. It is obvious that Mary Smith is special. In this example, the word special is not clear. Mary might be special because she's someone's lover, or because she is mentally challenged, or because she is entitled to some privilege. In any case, we cannot know because the statement is vague. Here's another example. Person A, what do you do for a living? Person B, I'm an artist. Here we can see the word artist is vague. Is the person a painter, a sculptor, a songwriter, a poet? Also, in this example, we see another important aspect of vagueness. People often offer vague responses in order to dodge questions. Consider these examples. Judge, where were you on the night of December 14th? Defendant, I was out. Example number 4, Veronica, how is your first semester at UC Berkeley, George? George, oh, it is what it is. In both cases, we see vague responses that are meant to dodge the question. In example 3, the defendant states she was out. It's unclear as to what this specifically means. In the next example, George replies by stating, it is what it is. This may appease Veronica. However, it is still a vague answer that does not reveal how George's first semester is going. We must be on the lookout for ambiguous and vague words and phrases as we read the news, listen to politicians, and talk with our friends. Also, we need to try and avoid vagueness and ambiguity ourselves, despite that it is often the easiest type of communication. Speaking and writing with clarity and precision takes work, but it ultimately reveals rather than obscures the truth. Next, we have equivocation. I don't know which way I want to turn my hat and shit. Hold on, let me. No. I can't figure it out. Oh, well. Let's keep going. Equivocation. This fallacy occurs when one word or phrase is used in two different ways in an argument. All right, I'm going to turn it this way. Yeah, I can live with that. Sometimes the fallacy of equivocation is called the double meaning fallacy. Equivocation always relies on an ambiguous word or phrase and draws its conclusion from this ambiguity. For example, all men are created equal. Women are not men. Therefore, women are not created equal. In this example, we can see that men is used quite differently in the first and second sentences. In the first, men, it refers to all human beings. In the second, men, it refers to only males. This argument is clearly fallacious because it relies on two very different definitions of men. Consider these examples. Exercise is good for the heart. Johanna recently broke up with her boyfriend and says she has a broken heart. So she just needs to get some exercise. Next example. Philosophers say life is ultimately a mystery. My sister loves to curl up with a good mystery. Therefore, she must truly enjoy life. Final example. Everyone knows they should do what is right. I have a right to smoke. Therefore, I should smoke. In each of these examples, we can see clearly one word or phrase is used in two very different ways. We should always be aware of ambiguities and the use of double meanings. If an ambiguity or inconsistency is discovered in arguments, one should try and restate the argument in a clear manner, or one should dismiss it altogether. Next, we have weak analogy. An analogy is a comparison of one thing with something else for the purpose of explaining or persuading. The comparison might be of two people, events, places, or just about anything else. For example, one might say, Seattle is like a cleaner version of San Francisco. Here, the comparison between two cities is clear and straightforward. However, some analogies are unclear unhelpful, or downright nonsensical. These are called weak analogies. For example, renting a house rather than buying. It's like flushing your money down the toilet. In reality, renting is not simply throwing away money as the argument suggests, even if it does not intend, even if it does not end in investment or ownership. Rather, renting is paying for the temporary use of property or good. Many people use rented houses, houseboats, cars, textbooks, among other things. Using something you've paid for is not the same as flushing your money down the toilet. Here are two more examples of weak analogies. Denying the existence of God is like refusing to believe the sky is blue. Next example, recycling is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. In these examples, the analogies given are unclear and unhelpful. Furthermore, the two things compared in each argument have nothing in common. We must strive to avoid using faulty analogies, and we must always be on the lookout for weak comparisons. Next, we have pseudo-profundity. This fallacy is found when a statement appears to be insightful and profound, but in reality, it is unclear and incoherent. We hear supposedly wise and weighty proclamations quite regularly from New Age gurus, televangelists, and college professors. But many of these statements, on closer inspection, are so vague they might as well be meaningless. For example, reality does not exist. We exist on the shore of a collective nightmare. Example number 2. My philosophy is that the all becomes the one, which is identical to the self and to the cosmos through which knowledge is attained. At first glance, these statements appear intellectually deep. However, they lack clarity and specificity. Furthermore, each can be interpreted in a variety of ways. This can lead to multiple contradictory views, which in turn cause confusion. The philosopher Martin Heidegger was often accused of committing the fallacy of pseudo-profundity. For example, Paul Edwards believes Heidegger's philosophy is a perfect example of pseudo-profundity, or as Edwards puts it, hideous gibberish. Consider these excerpts from Heidegger's work. He says, "Is being a mere word and its meaning a vapor? Or does what it is designed by the word being hold within it the historical destiny of the West?" What the fuck? Next example. We are ourselves the entities to be analyzed. The being of any such entity is in each case mine. These entities, in their being, comport themselves toward their being. As entities with such being, they are delivered over to their own being. Being is that which is in an issue for every such entity. It should be noted that scholars continue to debate Heidegger's work. These statements from Heidegger's may be insightful or profoundly meaningful, but there's no way of knowing without further information from his writings. In any case, we must make it our goal to speak with clarity and coherence rather than vagueness and imprecision. Furthermore, we must listen critically to the statements of others, looking for clearness before assuming their words are profound or true, even when the speaker is an authority figure. Hold up. Who we got in here, man? What's up, Iron Maggot? What's up, Dragster? You know what I mean? Black China, what's good? What's up, Rain? What's up, Calacia? You know what I mean? Taking this motherfucking hat off, bro. All right, let's keep going. Next, we have inflation. The fallacy of inflation occurs when one inflates the importance of the issue that they're discussing, either for personal reasons or for rhetorical manipulation. Not to be confused with hyperbole. It is often encountered when one states dogmatically that the topic under discussion is without qualification more significant than any other topic being discussed. For example, the reason we should be talking about global warming is because it is the greatest threat to humankind in history. Example number 2. The Holy Scripture should be studied and taught. Why? Because the Bible is the most significant book ever written. Example number 3. We must fight for stricter drinking laws because alcoholism is the most urgent social dilemma facing us today. There is no doubt global warming is a serious threat. There is also no question that religious scriptures have vital cultural significance or that alcoholism is a social ill. However, in each of these examples, the importance of each topic is greatly inflated to serve the purposes of the person making the claim. Next, we have false certainty. More of a rhetorical device than a logical fallacy. This occurs when one insinuates something is guaranteed when it isn't. This is often referred to as false certainty. Quite commonly found in sales or politics, it can be seen in the following examples. Without a shadow of a doubt, we are certain this new policy will make us safer than we were in previous years to a greater or lesser degree. Example number 2. To me, the resolution is a safe bet, one I definitely feel is the right move to make. Therefore, you should agree with me. Example number 3. It has been demonstrated conclusively that this soda is 100% delicious and safe for nearly all consumers. In each of these examples, words and phrases such as certain and demonstrated conclusively are followed or preceded by qualifiers such as to me and nearly. This rhetorical technique can be quite effective. The emphasis on the language of certainty often takes precedence in the listener's mind, overshadowing the terms that negate the certainty. It should also be noted that these examples are not technically lies. The person presenting the claim makes sure to qualify his or her statement, leaving a back door out in case their guarantee doesn't come to pass. Next, we have fallacy of definition. There are different ways, or rather different types of the fallacy of definition. Here, the type we'll discuss occurs when one purports to define a term. However, instead of correctly defining the term, they describe it in a way which serves their purposes. Or, on occasion, the term will be defined in a way intended to manipulate the listener or audience. For example, democracy is defined as getting off your ass and getting involved. Example number 2. Let me explain the discipline of philosophy. It is defined as the spouting of nonsense. Example number 3. Privilege is defined as thinking something is not a problem because it is not a problem to you. In each of these examples, we see 2 common characteristics. First, the definition of the term is incorrect. Second, the definition given is biased or manipulative. It is important to remember that definitions should be as clear and thorough as possible without vagueness, ambiguity, or hinting at coercion. If a definition fails to meet these criteria, one should be cautious. So that's that chapter. That was chapter 1. You know what I mean? Any questions? No? All right. Ha! Thanks, Black China. I appreciate that. What's up, Lil B? I appreciate you listening. Chapter 2, fallacies of omission. You can't see it. I don't even know why I tried. First, we have bifurcation. The fallacy of bifurcation is also known as the black and white fallacy. This fallacy occurs when the arguer presents the listener with only 2 choices, when in fact, there are other possibilities to choose from. In other words, the argument limits the options of choices, omitting possible alternatives. The fallacy of bifurcation usually takes the following form. Premise: there are only 2 options, X and Y. Conclusion: option X is false, therefore, option Y must be true. We can clearly see that if there were indeed only 2 options, the argument would be valid. But the fallacy occurs when the argument concerns factual human categories rather than merely logical examples. For example, You are either a Republican or a Democrat. You are not a Republican, therefore, you must be a Democrat. In this example, only two political parties are presented in the premise, when in reality, why can't I say reality? Reality. When in reality, there are many others that should be considered: the Green, the Socialist, the Libertarian, the Independents, etc. The fallacy of bifurcation can also be found in loaded questions or assertions, which in themselves are not arguments. For example, you are either with us or against us. Next example, there are only two types of people in this country: those who love America and those who hate it. Next example, are you religious or are you an atheist? Next example, since you are critical of capitalism, you must be a socialist. In all of these examples, the options are limited. The fallacy is commonly used by politicians in order to manipulate people. We often hear of liberal versus conservative, us versus them, good versus evil, and pro-war versus anti-war, when in fact, there are other positions that need to be seriously considered. The fallacy of bifurcation is always an oversimplification of a more complex issue. I hope that makes sense to you all. You know what I mean? It's like saying, would you rather go to heaven or would you rather go to hell? As if those are the only two options. Since we're in the land of make-believe, you know what I mean? So if we're going to be already in the land of make-believe, well, then there's plenty of other hells, heavens, and afterlives we need to consider. You know what I mean? So that would be considered the fallacy of bifurcation. Let's keep going. A false dilemma. Like the fallacy of bifurcation, the false dilemma erroneously limits options. In fact, the bifurcation is a type of false dilemma. However, whereas the bifurcation limits the choices to only two, this fallacy may limit the options to three or more, when in reality, there are other alternatives that should be considered. For example, a restaurant menu reads, we have meals for all diets: vegetarian, vegan, and meat eaters. In this example, the options are limited to three, when in fact, there are more types of diets than those. Some people follow religious dietary guidelines. Some cannot eat gluten products. Some only eat organic foods. Here's a very different example of the false dilemma. Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or a Lord. This example is a common argument for the divinity of Christ. However, this statement limits the choices when there are other possibilities that should be considered. One alternate possibility, according to Muslims, is that Jesus was just a prophet. Another alternative, albeit unlikely, is that Jesus never existed. In any case, all possibilities should be considered in an honest and open manner. Here are some final examples of the false dilemma. Example number 3. College students are either working toward an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a master's degree. Example number 4. Professor to his students: do you believe in creationism, evolutionary theory, or intelligent design? Example number 5. Are you a size small, medium, or large? We should be aware of the false dilemma fallacy. One way to do this is by remembering that people, places, and events are often more complex than they seem. Next, we have the argumentum ad ignorantium. Argumentum ad ignorantium is Latin for argument from ignorance. This is one of the most common fallacies committed by Christians. One of the most common. But anyway, let's keep going. You could probably find a Christian argument for their God in every single one of these fallacies. Anyway, argumentum ad ignorantium is Latin for argument from ignorance. This is an argument that uses a lack of proof or evidence to convince the listener that the subject in question cannot be taken seriously or should be discounted completely. Often, the lack of proof or evidence is meant to imply a refutation. The structure of this argument takes the following form: there is no evidence or proof of X, therefore, X is false. X should be dismissed, or X has been refuted. The argumentum ad ignorantium fallacy is quite common in religious discussions. Consider this well-known example. The existence of God has never been disproved. Therefore, God must exist. One of the serious problems with the ad ignorantium fallacy is that in many cases, its opposite can be argued in the same manner. For example, the existence of God has never been proven, therefore, God does not exist. Simply because there is not verifiable evidence that a certain thing exists, this does not mean its existence should be dismissed or not taken seriously. More importantly, we must remember that a lack of proof is not a refutation. Here are 3 final examples. Candidate Smith has never spoken out concerning her views on abortion. Therefore, we can safely conclude she must be pro-choice. Example number 4. There is no proof extraterrestrials exist. Therefore, they must be figments of our imagination. Example number 5. Since we have no physical evidence supporting the claim that Socrates was a real person, we must conclude he never existed. Here we see a lack of evidence is used to discuss the issue at hand. In some cases, this lack of proof is used to argue for the opposite position. When we encounter little or no evidence in support of an assertion or claim, we should be honest with ourselves instead of jumping to hasty conclusions. It is far better to admit we don't have all the information needed to make an informed judgment than to make arguments from ignorance. Next, we have shifting the burden of proof. Shifting the burden of proof is usually used as a response to a particular argument. It's a type of argumentum ad ignorantium. This is an argument maintaining that because one cannot defend one's position, it must be incorrect or false. For example, lawyer: my client did not rob the bank last Friday. Prove that he did. In this example, the lawyer rests his argument on the sole basis that his client cannot be proven guilty. However, as is the case with the argumentum ad ignorantium, the lack of evidence in no way acts as a refutation of the argument's claim. Consider these examples. Brian: the CIA is in charge of cocaine distribution in the United States. Alex: well, that sounds unlikely. What evidence do you have supporting this theory? Brian: will prove that it's not so. Example number 3, preacher: God wants everyone to donate money to my ministry. Congregants: I don't think that's what God wants. Preacher: well, provide evidence God doesn't want it. The burden of proof in each of these examples is shifted from the arguer onto the opponent. However, it is not the job of the opponent to disprove the arguer's position. It is always the arguer's task to provide solid evidence in support of his or her case. Without evidence, the arguer is simply making unsupported assertions. Next, we have straw argument. The straw argument was originally named the straw man argument. It's an argument that intentionally intentionally presents a misrepresentation of a particular position in order to easily refute or dismiss it. A straw man is easier to knock down than a real person, hence the name. For example, Jews and Christians simply believe that if you are good, you will go to heaven, and if you are evil, you will go to hell. This is the gist of their belief, so you shouldn't take them seriously. Here, the views of Jews and Christians are intentionally distorted so they can be easily dismissed. However, one with an eye for fallacious argumentation will recognize the argument rests on an oversimplification. The theological beliefs of Jews and Christians are far more complicated than what is stated in the argument. Consider these final examples. Anarchism is a political ideology stating that everyone should run around and fornicate in the streets. It is for this reason I reject anarchism. Example 3. The Democratic position today is essentially a fascist and communist stance. So, if you're in favor of communism and fascism, you will vote for the Democratic Party. In both of these straw arguments, a misrepresentation is used in order to easily discredit or reject a position. We must be careful when we encounter one who claims to refute a position he or she finds disagreeable. Often, this is not a refutation of the actual position, but a refutation of a perversion of the position. You know what I mean? A corruption of the position, in my opinion. Right, is right. Or I know, right? They're literally opposites of each other. Like you can't be a fascist and a communist. That don't make any fucking sense at all. Next, we have reductionism. Reductionism occurs when one reduces a complex phenomenon to a single fact that may or may not be related to that phenomenon. This is often done in order to explain a many-sided or multifaceted issue, event, or belief system. Reductionism is regularly found in explanatory statements given for involved occurrences or systems of thought, such as religion, politics, or science. Consider these examples. Example 1. Religion is simply a response to economic inequality. Example number 2. Science is essentially determinism. Example number 3. Politics is nothing more than a power struggle. Here we see the basic structure of the fallacy of reductionism. X is nothing more than Y. This is similar to the straw man argument. Difference is the straw man argument intentionally misrepresents a particular point of view in order to dismiss it, whereas reductionism often involves an overgeneralized explanation that precludes other explanatory factors. This may or may not be intentional, but like the straw man argument, it's certainly intellectually lazy. Reductionism is a clear example of a fallacy of omission. All fallacies of omission leave out important information rather than attempting to explore and discuss the various aspects of the issue at hand. Next, we have fallacy of psychologism. I bet you never heard of that one. This fallacy is a type of reductionism. It might also be categorized as a causal fallacy. Whoops, not casual. Causal and casual look so similar when they're written down. So you have to excuse me. It might also be categorized as a causal fallacy. The fallacy of psychologism occurs when one reduces another's actions, beliefs, or desires to nothing more than a psychological mechanism or an unconscious fear or desire. For example, you're only a conservative because you unconsciously want someone to have a strict control over your behavior. Example number 2. Maria isn't consciously aware of it, but her belief in karma stems from her hidden desire for order and structure. Example number 3. Samuel only believes his religion because he has an irrational fear of displeasing his mother. The explanations in these examples may be partially correct. However, in reality, there is no discernible, verifiable evidence that deeply laden psychological influences have determined the beliefs of the individuals in the examples. Furthermore, while it may be true that psychological influences are present in humans, it doesn't follow that all significant motivations and concerns stem from unconscious desires and fears. It should also be noted that the fallacy of psychologism is not the same as psychologism in epistemology and metaphysics. Both of the latter concerns the foundations of logical laws and mathematics. The former is defined and explained above. Next, we have the perfectionist fallacy. This fallacy is committed when a person argues that a task or a goal should not be attempted because the possibility of reaching the goal or accomplishing the task is unlikely. This argument is heard quite often when one rejects a certain business or political proposal due to the improbability of attaining it with perfection. For example, we will never be able to fully eradicate crime on the streets of Oakland. Consequently, we should not waste our time and energy trying to. Example number 2. To create a coffee company that can truly compete with Java House is impossible. Therefore, we should not open a coffee shop. In other words, the perfectionist fallacy states that if you cannot do something perfectly, then you should not even attempt it. This assumes that there is a right way to reach a goal, and the end result is more important than the process or experience of working toward it. Another way of stating this fallacy is as follows. If you can't do X in a particular manner, then you shouldn't do it at all. Here are some final examples. Example number 3. My artwork will never be as good as Picasso's or Chagall's. Therefore, I would not waste my time with it. Example number 4. I keep going back to cigarettes. I've tried to quit so many times, but I can't. I'll always struggle with this. So I guess I'll keep smoking. Example number 5. If you cannot be a perfect husband, then why do you want to get married in the first place? Example number 6. I'll never be fluent in French, so I dropped out of French class. One of the main problems with this fallacy is its assumption that there is a universal definition of perfection and that our actions should meet this definition and should be 100% complete. In reality, many human goals or tasks get their value from the process of learning or making an effort rather than from their end results. Next, we have the fallacy of the unknowable act. There are so many fallacies in here, y'all. The fallacy of the unknowable fact. The fallacy of the unknowable fact contains as one of its premises a claim that is unknowable. This fallacy uses as evidence a fact, often speculation, that cannot be verified at the present time. For example, a father says to his daughter, "If you don't go to college, then you'll never be successful." In this example, the father is claiming he knows what the future holds for his daughter. However, the future is unknown. Therefore, there is no way to verify or falsify the father's claim. Consider this example. If only Adolf Hitler had a healthy relationship with his parents, World War II would never have occurred. No matter what one finds about Hitler's relationship with his parents, one cannot know how his relationship influenced his political decisions, let alone world history. To include this type of claim in one's arguments is to include unverifiable data. In order to argue well, one must avoid appealing to the unknowable. Here are 2 final examples of the fallacy of the unknowable fact. Example number 3. I wish I'd gone to dental school instead of majoring in art. I'd be rich now. Example number 4. Elizabeth should have married Stan instead of Wayne. She'd be so much happier. Next, we have willed ignorance. More of a diversionary tactic than a logical fallacy, willed ignorance remains a common response to rational argumentation. Willed ignorance occurs when one simply refuses to engage in logical discourse or critical thinking. Maintaining his or her beliefs about the issue are the final and absolute answer. This often occurs in scientific, political, or religious discussions. For example, person A. It seems to me there are contradictions in the New Testament regarding the status and role of women. Person B. Well, what the Bible says is true. End of conversation. Example 2. Person A. There seems to be some inconsistencies in Einstein's theory of relativity. Person B. Einstein was a genius, and what he said is indisputable, period. Example number 3. Person A. After reading The Republic, I believe Plato is endorsing totalitarianism. Person B. You have no idea what you're talking about, and I will not discuss Plato's work with you. Willed ignorance is simply an inflexible, uncritical, unquestioning attitude that refuses to listen to the other side of an argument. A fundamental prerequisite for critical thinking is the ability to carefully and patiently consider various alternatives to the issue at hand. Critical thinking requires reflection and analysis of various viewpoints. This does not mean all positions are correct. No, sir. This simply means one should avoid willed ignorance and instead carefully analyze all arguments. Chapter 3, fallacies of intrusion. What's up, H.J.S. Peer? What's up, Safir Hamdallah? You know what I mean? What's up, Big Gray? You know what I mean? The original Clapper, Theo the Painter. What's up, Theo the Painter? Oh, shit. What's up, Kyle Wally? You know what I mean? We're here reading from the book called Informal Logical Fallacies. So pay attention because at the end of the book, there's a quiz. So I hope you're taking notes. All right, next we have fallacies of intrusion, beginning with the argumentum ad hominem. Argumentum ad hominem is translated as argument against the person. The abusive form of this fallacy occurs when name calling, slander, or insults directed at a particular person are interjected into an argument. These are often used in order to manipulate the listener or audience. Usually, evidence or solid premises are substituted with personal attacks. Yet, on occasion, good premises are augmented with name calling or derogatory terms. This is purely a psychological technique, has nothing to do with solid reasoning or logical argumentation. Here are some examples of the abusive ad hominem fallacy. Example 1. Candidate Greenstein is a bleeding heart, unpatriotic liberal. Therefore, we cannot trust him as our leader. Example 2. Professor Dreyfus is an arrogant jerk. You should not take his English class. Example 3. Why should I listen to your political arguments? You're nothing but a big loser. Example number 4. How can we trust a cultural Marxist to teach our children about American history? Here we see premises and a loaded question, incorporating name calling instead of valid reasons. One encounters this fallacy quite regularly in political campaigns, radio talk shows, and conversations with family and friends. Even though the abusive ad hominem fallacy can be entertaining and even effective, it still relies on personal attacks rather than solid premises. For this reason alone, this argument should be avoided. Next, we have argumentum ad hominem circumstantial. The ad hominem circumstantial fallacy, like the abusive version, seeks to attack the arguer rather than the argument. However, instead of resorting to personal attacks, an attempt is made to discredit the arguer's position by implying that he or she has impure or selfish motives. For example, you shouldn't listen to Professor Miller's arguments for faculty salary increases, no less, because the only reason he's doing so is because he gets a benefit from it. In this example, we see that rather than his actual arguments being examined or critiqued, Professor Miller himself is being attacked. It claims Miller has selfish motives for arguing in a certain manner, and because of this, his arguments should be dismissed. The circumstantial fallacy does not only attack arguers and dismiss their specific arguments, as in the example above, but it can also be used to discredit any position or stance one might hold. For example, Julie only accepted Harold's invitation to dinner because she felt sorry for him. There's no way she actually likes him. Example 3. It is obvious Aunt Sue's Christmas gift to Emma was given with ulterior motives. She gave her an airline gift certificate, but she might as well have just asked Emma to come babysit. Example 4. I will not accept the administration's arguments for war. Clearly, the only reason the president wants to be in the Middle East is to secure national resources. In all of these examples, the arguments or actions alone are not taken seriously because certain circumstances have supposedly corrupted the source of each argument or action. We need to remember that not all arguments are presented with ulterior motives, and that arguments should, if possible, be analyzed by themselves apart from their sources. Next, we have argumentum ad hominem post mortem. This fallacy is committed when one argues that if a certain philosopher, scientist, or any other great thinker of the past were alive today, he or she would engage in an ad hominem attack. Ain't that a bit? This fallacy is heard quite often on college campuses coming from students and professors alike. For example, person A offers an interpretation or idea about an issue. And then person B in response says, if Nietzsche were here, he would call you an idiot. Example number 2, person A offers a critique of Plato's philosophy. Person B responds with, if Plato were here, he'd say your mind is not fit for learning and you should simply be a laborer. Example 3, person A questions and objects to a Freudian theory. Person B in response says, well, Freud would say you are a sexually repressed jackass. The post-mortem ad hominem attack always uses an authority figure of the past, usually one who was dead, to attack a person, idea, or argument. This fallacy is very easy to recognize. It almost always begins with, if person X were here, he or she would say such and such. This is fallacious because of the impossibility of being able to know what someone would say here and now in our current historical and social context. We have no way of knowing what Plato, Nietzsche, or any other great thinker of the past might say if they were engaged in a philosophical discussion with someone at the present time. Even if we feel we are an authority on an influential thinker, this doesn't mean we necessarily know what his or her exact response to an idea, issue, or argument would be today. Next, we have argumentum ad verecundiam. The argumentum ad verecundiam is often translated from the Latin as argument from authority. This fallacy relies on a false authority figure as support for a particular claim. A false authority is one who has little or no expertise in the particular context in which he or she is being used. The ad verecundiam argument can be found quite regularly in advertising. Often, celebrities, entertainers, or athletes will promote certain items or products of which they have no in-depth knowledge. For example, one might encounter a movie star selling pharmaceuticals or a country singer promoting a politician. A legitimate authority is one who is an expert in the appropriate field. For example, when a doctor states a certain medication is needed, the patient should seriously consider his advice. Or if a professor of mathematics states an algebraic equation ought to be done in a certain way, the student should listen. If, however, one's doctor is preaching about religion, or if one's mathematics professor is pontificating about politics, both would be considered illegitimate or at least questionable authorities. There are many other examples of the ad verecundiam fallacy. Consider the example. According to my grandmother, UC Berkeley is not a respected university, so you should reconsider attending this fall. When we know that his grandmother is not an authority figure on colleges and enrollments and whatever. Anyway, example number 2. I know democracy is the most moral form of government. Only last week, my pastor presented a sermon on the moral superiority of democracy. Example number 3. My literature professor gave a wonderful lecture on atheism. He's an expert, so he must be right. And finally, for the last month, I've had headaches, nausea, and chills. I considered going to the doctor, but my mother says I just need to rest. So I've decided to rest more. Mom knows best. In these examples, false authorities are appealed to. When creating good arguments, authorities may be used. However, they should be experts in the related field. Also, with this in mind, One must always remember that even experts can be wrong. Next, we have the argumentum ad baculum. In ancient Rome, a rod called a baculum was carried by each leader to symbolize his power. Named after this practice, the argumentum ad baculum fallacy is also known as the argument from the rod, or often it is simply referred to as the argument from fear. The ad baculum argument uses threats, punishments, or scare tactics to convince the listener to accept the conclusion of the argument. In short, fear replaces or is added to the premises or conclusion in order to psychologically manipulate the intended audience. The ad baculum fallacy usually takes the following form. The arguer presents his or her position, which includes threats or scare tactics. Conclusion: the arguer's position must be taken seriously, or else harm may ensue. Yet, the ad baculum argument can also be found in many other forms. The common factor is always the appeal to fear. For example, Sue, if you don't go out with me, remember that I know where your family lives. Example number 2, if we don't take care of the terrorists, then our children and grandchildren will live in constant threat of being attacked. Example number 3, no matter where you live, you are never safe from West Nile virus. Therefore, you should buy the new West Nile virus protective lotion available at your local drugstore. The appeal to fear can be a very powerful and effective form of argumentation. Politicians, preachers, and parents often use ad baculum arguments. So we must remember that threats and scare tactics do not constitute solid premises. I should not accept your argument that Jesus loves me simply because I don't want to go to hell, do I? So believe in Jesus. That's not an argument. You're committing the ad baculum fallacy, you piece of shit. Appeal to common knowledge is the next fallacy. Appeal to common knowledge. This fallacy occurs when solid premises are replaced with the fact that a belief is well known. It's sometimes referred to as the every child knows fallacy because it can include statements like, even a child knows this, or this is so obvious, even a child would recognize it. Often, the arguer will appeal to everyone in his or her premises. However, the fact that something is widely accepted as true does not establish the truth of a conclusion. Here are some variations of this fallacy. Example: the earth is millions of years old. How do I know this? Because everyone knows this. Example number 2, even a small child can recognize morality and immorality. So you cannot act as if all human behavior is morally ambiguous. Example number 3, come on. Everyone knows Governor Wilkins is the best candidate for the position. Example number 4, of course you should accept the promotion. I can hardly believe you're asking for advice. We all know money improves the quality of life. As demonstrated in these examples, the arguer committing this fallacy uses an appeal to common knowledge rather than providing solid evidence for the claim. While this fallacy is heard every day, it is indeed the backbone of peer pressure and the latest cultural trends. We must remember its inherent faulty reasoning. Next, we have the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is an argument assuming a statement, position, or idea must be flawed if the source of the statement, position, or idea is flawed. Often, the genetic fallacy is an attempt to dismiss or refute another's position based solely on the origin of the position. The genetic fallacy usually has the following form. Premise: X originated from Y. Therefore, X must have similarities to Y and cannot be taken seriously. This argument assumes X is like Y simply because it came from Y. This is flawed reasoning. Consider some examples of the genetic fallacy. Why should we liberals not listen to Mr. Daniels? Because Mr. Daniels is from a very conservative town in the Midwest. Example 2. I will not vote for Schroeder. Everyone knows she's German, and we all know German history. No anti-Semitic candidates for me. Anyone who reasons like that is a fucking moron. In these examples, people are dismissed based on the erroneous assumption that they necessarily share some certain negative characteristics with their place of origin. We must remember that a person or position should never be dismissed solely on the basis of origination. A position or argument should be judged on the basis of its strength or validity, not on its source. Argumentum ad populum. Argumentum ad populum, or argument from the people, is a fallacy that appeals to a group of people's beliefs, tastes, or values. The people appealed to can be a small group, such as an individual clique or church group, or it can be a large group of people, such as Republicans, Baptists, or feminists. The argumentum ad populum fallacy states that because a group holds a particular belief, attitude, or value, this must lend support to the correctness of that belief, attitude, or value. Also, the ad populum argument often claims that because the group is a certain way, the listener should accept the group's manner or action, or at least consider it as valid. For example, the Southern Baptist Convention maintains the Bible is inerrant. Therefore, you should also defend the inerrancy of the Bible. Example number 2. The Democratic Party endorses candidate Fuller for president. Because you are a registered Democrat, you should support candidate Fuller. Example number 3. Our family has always acted in such and such manner. Since you're part of this family, you too should act in such and such manner. In these examples, a group is appealed to as the authority on a particular issue. This fallacy occurs in assuming the group is correct. Often, the opinions of groups can be wrong. Consider outdated scientific and mythological beliefs. Consider forms of racism, sexism, and fascism practiced by many groups. Simply because a group of people hold a certain set of beliefs to be correct doesn't in any way imply the accurateness of those beliefs. Argumentum ad populum is also known as the democratic fallacy. In a democracy, laws are passed and officials are given offices by the consensus of the largest number of people. However, simply because a large group of voters believe one course of action to be the best doesn't ensure that the votes of the majority is necessarily correct or right. Beliefs, attitudes, and values need to be closely examined separately from the groups that support those beliefs. No matter who or how many people hold a certain belief, their advocacy does not prove its correctness. Next, we have appeal to tradition. The appeal to tradition fallacy is an argument that appeals to tradition or custom as justification for its conclusion. Traditions and customs can be admirable and are sometimes helpful when making decisions and formulating arguments. However, these alone do not provide solid premises for an argument. For example, you should vote for a Republican. Your father and his father were both dedicated Republicans, so you should be too. Example 2, mother to her daughter. Our family has been Roman Catholic for many generations. How can you even consider leaving the church? Example number 3. It has always been our custom to treat women this way. How can you challenge our customs? Example number 4. How can you be certain your religious text is accurate? Because our tradition tells us it is. In each of these examples, an appeal to tradition is found. The error in appealing solely to tradition is this: tradition by itself is not infallible. There have been many defective traditions, not to mention unjust and harmful ones. Simply because an idea or way of life has been a tradition doesn't guarantee it is correct. Next, we have tu quoque. Tu quoque is translated from the Latin as you too. This fallacy is often used as a response to a particular claim, argument, or suggestion. The tu quoque fallacy occurs when one charges another with hypocrisy or inconsistency in order to avoid taking the other's position seriously. For example, mother to her daughter, you should stop smoking. It's harmful to your health. Daughter, why should I listen to you? You started smoking when you were 16. In this example, the daughter commits the tu quoque fallacy. She dismisses her mother's argument because she believes her mother is speaking in a hypocritical manner. While the mother may indeed be a hypocrite, it doesn't invalidate her arguments. Liars, manipulators, and even hypocritical parents can create good arguments. As with the genetic fallacy, one should not dismiss an argument based on its source. Consider these examples. A father to his son. You shouldn't drink until you're 21, son. It's unsafe and it's illegal. Son, how can I take you seriously? I know for a fact you drank when you were underage. Example number 3. Teacher to a student. One should always recycle paper, plastic, and glass products. It's good for the earth, and it's good for future generations. Student, ha! I saw you throw your soda bottle in the trash after lunch. Why should we listen to someone who doesn't practice what they preach? As critical thinkers, we must consider the argument itself, separate from its source. This is often hard to do, but in any case, the argument must be left to stand or fall on its own, regardless of hypocrisy or inconsistency on the part of the arguer. Next, we have 2 wrongs make a right. This fallacy often assumes that because an unethical act has been committed, committing the same act again will somehow correct the initial unethical behavior. Simply repeating wrong behavior doesn't make it right. Like the tu quoque fallacy, the 2 wrongs make a right fallacy is often used to rationalize undesirable conduct. For example, why do you keep lying to your husband? Well, he's been lying to me for years. Example number 2. How can you live with yourself knowing you've killed 5 people in cold blood? Well, the state kills people every day. It's called the death penalty. Ever heard of it? Example number 3. Aren't you going to return the wallet you found? Well, why should I? When I lost my wallet, no one returned mine. In these examples, an assumption is made that unethical behavior is somehow justified because others previously engaged in the same or similar conduct. We must remember this type of argumentation is seriously flawed. Mimicking others' actions doesn't justify one's own behavior. Next, we have red herring. This fallacy gets its name from a practice one used in hunting. In order to hone their dog's training skills, hunters would drag a herring across the hunting path, creating a distracting smell that might lead the dogs away from the correct path. The hunters would then train the dogs to avoid the distracting smell and to follow only the scent they were instructed to follow. Like this practice, the red herring fallacy incorporates a distraction, an irrelevant issue, in order to divert attention away from the topic under discussion. For example, lawyer. Your Honor, I know my client murdered the bank teller. However, my client should not receive the maximum penalty. She was abandoned as a child, abused in foster homes, homeless by the age of 10, and she's currently addicted to drugs and alcohol. She's already suffering a great deal. She deserves mercy. In this example, the lawyer incorporates irrelevant issues in order to divert the judge's attention away from the crime. These issues may be persuasive. However, they are irrelevant to the topic at hand, murder. The hardships of the defendant's life do not change the fact that she murdered someone. In addition to a red herring, this example is an ad misericordiam fallacy. Consider these examples. Police officer, why do you have cocaine in your back pocket? Man, I was released from prison last night. I can't go back. Please answer my question. Why do you have cocaine in your back pocket? Yeah, I really like your wristwatch. Where'd you get it? Next example. Wife, I cannot believe you forgot Valentine's Day again. Husband, did I tell you how beautiful you look in that dress? Example number 4. Student to his professor. Professor, you believe our political system is profoundly flawed. Can you explain your reasoning? Professor, your question reminds me of a trip I once took to Ecuador. In these examples, an irrelevant issue is incorporated into the discussion in order to divert attention away from the topic at hand. This is precisely the goal of the red herring fallacy. A popular form of the red herring fallacy is sometimes known as whataboutism. On occasion, it also takes the form of a tu quoque fallacy. This is often employed as a response to a claim or argument, bringing up a separate issue as a distraction. For example, Christopher says to Joanna, I have been studying modern China and am quite appalled at China's long history of human rights violations. You should look at the data. I think you will agree with me. Johanna says, well, what about human rights violations here in the United States? We have an atrocious history of human rights violations. We have more people in prison than China. Example number 2. How can you justify your economic policy? It has directly resulted in unemployment and suffering for thousands of people, said the journalist to the politician. The politician responds, what about my predecessor? His policies used or caused more unemployment than mine. Example number 3. Judge, you have been accused of lying under oath and tampering with evidence. What do you have to say for yourself? Defendant, what about Mr. Smith? When he was in my position, he did far worse things. Why don't we talk about Mr. Smith? As we can see, each of these whataboutisms are versions of the red herring fallacy. In each case, the respondent replies, well, what about bringing up another topic without responding to the initial claim or accusations? These responses are much easier than actually dealing with the details of the preceding claims. It is also a sly way of changing the subject. In any form, the red herring is a fallacious rhetorical technique that certainly needs to be recognized and called out. Next, we have ignoratio elenchi. Ignoratio elenchi is often used as a blanket term for missing the point. Ignoratio elenchi means refutation or ignorance of the proof. Aristotle's Sophisticated Refutations, the first book in the Western intellectual tradition discussing logical fallacies, offers the clearest explanation of ignoratio elenchi. It is an argument which draws the wrong and often irrelevant conclusion from the premises. For example, the number of car accidents is increasingly. I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, here we are. The number of car accidents is increasing exponentially. Therefore, more people must be encouraged to work from home. Example number 2. There's a growing rate of college students dropping out before completing a degree. This is why we need to get rid of all prerequisite math and English classes. In each of these examples, the conclusions are irrelevant to the issue at hand. If car accidents and college completion rates are problems, then these issues must be addressed directly and investigated without jumping to conclusions that miss the point of the issue at hand. In a slightly different version, the ignoratio elenchi fallacy is encountered as a response to a claim or argument. For example, Judge, where were you and your wife on the night of March 28th? I will not answer your question. My relationship with my wife is none of your business. Example number 4. Student, why did you give me a 0 on my philosophy essay? Professor, because you submitted it 3 weeks late. Student, but I worked really hard on the essay and incorporated strong arguments, just like you requested. In these examples, we find clear illustrations of missing the point. In the first, the judge is inquiring about the whereabouts of the defendant, not his relationship with his wife. In this second example, the point is that the essay was turned in late, not that a great deal of work went into writing the essay. It should also be noted that the ignoratio elenchi often takes the form of a red herring, as the examples above indicate. Next, we have argumentum ad crumenum. Crumena is Latin for a purse that stores money. The argumentum ad crumenum assumes wealth, money, or possessions are the measure of the correctness of an argument. For example, we should carefully consider Senator Montgomery's political position. He was a very successful entrepreneur before he became a senator. Example number 2. Emily must be doing something right. Just look at all the nice clothes she has. Example number 3. Bill Gates dropped out of college and became one of the wealthiest people alive. He must have known what he was talking about. In these examples, it is assumed a person's position is somehow more correct due to the wealth or possessions he or she has. However, simply because one has a great deal of money doesn't ensure the validity of their or the validity of their stance on politics, relationships, religion, education, or any other fucking matter. Next, we have argumentum ad misericordiam. The argumentum ad misericordiam is also known as the appeal to pity. It is an argument that appeals to emotions rather than providing solid evidence or facts to support the claim. By evoking pity, the arguer hopes to persuade the audience or listener to accept his or her conclusion. For example, boyfriend, you shouldn't break up with me. Girlfriend, why? Boyfriend, because the thought of losing you hurts too much. In this example, the boyfriend is trying to invoke a sense of pity in his girlfriend in order that she might stay with him. However, this is not a logical reason for staying with someone. Simply feeling sorry for another is no reason to agree with his or her claim. Consider these examples. Come on, I need you to lie for me. If you don't, I'll lose my job, my wife, and kids. Example number 3, Sue. Let's go to the philosophy lecture on Monday night. Brad, I can't go. I have homework. Sue, if you don't go, I'll have to walk home alone in the dark. Are you sure you won't go? Example number 4. Professor Dreyfus, please reconsider the grade you gave me on my final. If I don't get an A, then I won't be able to get into graduate school and my life will be ruined. In these examples, appeals to pity are made. Rather than providing good reasons to support the claim, the arguer tries to arouse an emotional response. The ad misericordiam is often quite effective. However, we must be careful not to allow emotional responses to replace clear and coherent reasoning. Hold on, I need a cigarette. Hola, Christian Duarte, the Virgin Warrior Christ. If we consider that most of the things said about Jesus in Scripture is that they are talking about the Son, then it all makes perfect sense. The Bible is astrological. So no. All right, chapter 4. Fallacies with built-in assumptions. Presuppositions, as it were. And first up, we have the petitio principii. This fallacy is sometimes known as begging the question. From the Latin petitio principii is translated as appealing to the first principles. Petitio principii uses parts of its conclusion in its own premise as support. This is a type of circular reasoning. Often this fallacy occurs when one uses two different words, one in the premise and one in the conclusion, which share the same definition. For example, abortion is wrong because abortion is unethical. In this example, the conclusion, abortion is wrong, is supported by the premise, abortion is unethical. However, this argument begs the question because an act that is unethical, by definition, is an act that is wrong. Consider these examples. Your Honor, the defendant shouldn't, the defendant should be held responsible for stealing my client's purse because he took something that did not belong to him. Example number 3. The Bible is true because it contains no falsehoods. In these examples, the conclusions are simply different versions of the premises. The conclusion should be established and supported, not simply be a restatement or variations. Complex question is our next one. Complex question. The complex question is not an argument. It is a particular type of question. More specifically, it is a loaded question. That is, a question with a built-in assumption. The complex question can often throw off the listener by forcing him or her to answer a flawed question. For example, a lawyer says to the defendant, "Where did you hide the murder weapon?" This example assumes the defendant knows where the weapon is. If the defendant answers that he didn't hide the murder weapon, then the judge and the jury might assume that he did have the weapon in his possession at some point. The only way around this question is for the defendant to call to attention that the question is loaded. Consider these additional examples. When did you stop beating your wife? Next, when are you going to have children? In the first example, the assumption is made that the person questioned did abuse his wife. In the next example, the question assumes that the individual has decided to have children. The best response to these types of questions is not simply to answer the question as it has been posed. Rather, one should bring to light that the question has built-in assumptions, lest one fall into the trap set by the questioner. Consider the built-in assumptions in the following examples. How many drinks have you had tonight? Next example. How much did you enjoy the movie? We must be careful to avoid asking loaded questions, and we must work to create straightforward, clear dialogue. Next, we have appeal to human nature. This fallacy is an error in reasoning that appeals to human nature without clearly defining it. More specifically, it occurs when one uses this vague notion as justification for a particular human action. For example, well, of course people worship celebrities. It's in our nature to worship them. Example number 2. Defendant, Your Honor, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and I was doing what human nature is best at, defending and protecting myself. How can you hold someone responsible for what's in their nature? Example number 3. Humans, by their very nature, are political animals. Thus, it is clear all individuals should participate in the political process. It's important to remember the appeal to human nature is often used as an excuse for certain behavior. The argument usually claims one should not be held responsible because an action was simply in his or her human nature. One problem with this kind of appeal is that the notion of human nature itself is unclear. Many people speak of the nature of human beings, but on closer inspection, it's difficult to specifically and clearly state what this means and what specific actions fall into this category. Furthermore, even if we were able to arrive at a universal definition, it would not necessarily mean human nature could be used as a license for any type of behavior. Next, we have the is-ought fallacy. Is-ought. This fallacy occurs when an argument uses a purely descriptive statement, such as an is statement, as a premise and moves to a prescriptive statement, an ought statement, as its conclusion. The words is and ought do not necessarily need to be in the argument for the is-ought fallacy to occur. There will, however, always be a description followed by a prescription. The is-ought fallacy has the following form. Descriptive statement, is. Conclusion, prescriptive statement, ought. Here are some examples. Humans have carnivorous teeth. Therefore, you should eat meat. Example 2. The phone is on sale. Therefore, you should buy it. Example number 3. She asked you out. You should go out with her. As we can see from these examples, the is ought fallacy usually is found when someone is trying to convince another person to act a particular way. However, we cannot assume we can determine how things ought to be just because we know how things are. To do so is flawed reasoning because a prescriptive suggestion or command cannot be derived solely from a descriptive statement or observation. In other words, just because we have the facts, this does not necessarily mean we always know how others, or ourselves for that matter, should behave because of these facts. It should be noted that this fallacy, unlike others, is debated by many philosophers. Some intellectuals, like John Searle, maintain the is ought fallacy is not truly a fallacy, but a coherent and valid form of reasoning. I'll leave it to the reader to decide whether he or she believes the is ought fallacy is indeed a fallacy or not. Next, we have projection. The fallacy of projection occurs when one projects personal feelings, beliefs, or attitudes onto another person without evidence to support this assumption. This is similar to the concept of projection found in certain psychological theories. Sigmund Freud believed individuals often project unconscious desires and fears onto the external world. The fallacy of projection is different in that it is more generally applied to lazy assumptions we all sometimes make about others. Projection can easily be described as assuming others' experiences of reality and or conclusions concerning reality are the same as our own. For example, of course Sharon will agree with us. She witnessed the attack too. Therefore, even though she's not here to cast a vote, I'm sure she'll confirm our decision to go to war. Example number 2. How can you possibly eat more than one piece of pizza? One piece always fills me up. Example number 3. Jonathan is late to work again this morning. I'm only late to work when I partied the night before, so Jonathan must have had a great time partying last night. Example number 4. I can see God's handiwork clearly in nature. Anyone who looks at the trees will certainly come to the same conclusion. In these examples, one projects onto another one's own personal beliefs, which have been derived from his or her individual experience. The problem with this type of reasoning is that individuals have different understandings of events, food, other people, nature, and of almost everything else in life. This doesn't mean that others' interpretations will always be different than one's own. In fact, many people share very similar experiences and interpretations. But key point to remember about the fallacy of projection is this: simply because one has arrived at a certain conclusion, it does not follow others will make the same judgment. Next, we have the appeal to anecdotal evidence. Oh, you hear this all the time with Christians. God is real because I had a personal experience. Therefore, like, get the fuck out of here. An anecdote often refers to a personal experience. I knew it. See? An anecdote often refers to a personal experience or a short account of an incident. The fallacy of appealing to anecdotal evidence is usually an argument where one calls upon a personal experience or a passed down story, then assumes all other like cases will be similar. In this way, it is somewhat uh, like the fallacy of projection. However, the fallacy of anecdotal evidence relies on causal evidence, usually uncorroborated and not necessarily a projection of the individual making the argument. Usually, the appeal to anecdotal evidence relies on one specific exceptional case and then overgeneralizes from that case. For example, many believe smoking cigarettes causes cancer. This isn't true. My grandmother smoked cigarettes until she was 92 years old and she didn't have cancer. Example number 2. How do I know Bigfoot exists? Because I watched a video online where a hunter in Alaska personally encountered Bigfoot. Example number 3. Eating at Ricardo's restaurant will make you sick. How do I know? Because my uncle ate there last year and the very next day had food poisoning. In these Examples: personal incidences are used as premises, and the conclusions are drawn only from these. As critical thinkers, we must consider various accounts in order to arrive at solid conclusions. The limited experience of one or even a small group of people doesn't provide enough evidence for a guaranteed conclusion. It should be noted that the first example is also the fallacy of the exception disproves the rule. Next, we have the narcissist fallacy. I didn't even know that was such a fallacy, to be honest. In Greek mythology, Narcissus was a young man who was in love with his own image. Narcissism usually refers to a type of behavior that is egotistical or vain. The narcissist fallacy occurs when one assumes others are thinking about them. This is similar to the fallacy of projection, where one projects one's beliefs, values, or feelings onto others. The key difference between these two fallacies, however, is that you commit the narcissist fallacy when you make the false assumption that people notice you, care about you, or are thinking about you. Consider these examples. He smiled when I walked by. He must think these new jeans look really good on me. Example number 2. My neighbor doesn't talk to me anymore. It's probably because he's jealous of my new car. Example number 3. I'll go ahead and pull onto the freeway. Other drivers will see me and let me merge. Example number 4. Today, the mailman was rude to me, and so was the toll booth attendant. I can't believe people have been treating me so poorly on my birthday. In each of these examples, an assumption is made about others and their motivations and concerns. If we're honest with ourselves, we know those who we encounter in everyday life are not necessarily thinking about us, even when they treat us in a certain manner. Other people have their own personal preoccupations, financial, marital, political, medical, spiritual, and so on, which often do not include us. Next, we have anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism, this fallacy gets its name from the Greek words anthropos, meaning human, and morphe, meaning form. This fallacy occurs when one assumes a non human being or thing has the same characteristics as a human. Often, this involves a projection of human emotions or behavior onto something non human. For example, because of our lack of respect for nature, the earth has become angry with us humans. Example number 2. As I look at the magnificent California redwoods, I feel them calling my name and extending their love to me. Example number 3. Don't leave your laptop in the direct sunlight. Computers get stubborn and vengeful if they're overheated. In these examples, human emotions or attributes are assumed to be part of the non human world. We must be honest with ourselves and try to recognize projection of this sort. When we allow ourselves to make unfounded assumptions about nature and non human creatures, we are reasoning with inauthenticity, laziness, and presumption. May our reasoning instead be built with the principles of critical thinking, which will help us avoid anthropomorphism and other fallacies. Next, we have the fallacy of efficiency. Many people value efficiency in various areas of life, business, school, technology, and so forth. And this is understandable. Often, if something is quicker, more effective, or practical, then it's seen as necessarily better than that which is considered less efficient. However, we should remember that simply because a person, action, or event is more efficient doesn't always mean it is superior. To make this assumption is to commit the fallacy of efficiency. Consider these examples. Jessica, you should buy the latest phone. It's really fast. Bert, well, I'm quite satisfied with my phone. It works fine and it's simple to use. Jessica, I can't believe you, Bart. Your phone is old and slow. Faster is always better. Example number 2, Doris. You should take Highway 5 to Santa Barbara. It's the quickest route. Stanley, I prefer to take Highway 1. It may take longer, but the view of the ocean is spectacular. Doris, sounds like a waste of time and gas. Example number 3, college student. I've decided to major in philosophy. I love reading Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and other influential thinkers in Western history. Mother, what job will that prepare you for? You should major in business. A business degree is the only way to quickly secure a job after college. We hear conversations like this regularly. However, neither the correctness of one's decisions nor the quality of one's life depends solely on speed, effectiveness, or practicality. Consider aged wine, a meal made from scratch, or music, art, and literature. Many of the things in life we treasure and appreciate are not practical or efficient at all. Next, we have the exception disproves the rule. This fallacy occurs when one assumes an exception disproves a well established rule or acts as a substantial refutation to the rule. While an exception may prove there are indeed deviations, this doesn't guarantee that a well substantiated general rule is absent. Consider these common examples. Professor of ethics. Generally speaking, human beings have always found cannibalism reprehensible and morally unacceptable. Student. That's not true, Professor. I read about a tribe in New Guinea that eats their dead. Example number 2. Jody. The rule of law in various forms has been paramount in all organized civilizations. Belinda. You are correct. I recently watched a documentary about a commune in the Southwest without laws. Example number 3, doctor. Usually antibiotics help stop bacterial infections. I recommend you take antibiotics. Patient. Antibiotics don't work. My aunt had a bacterial infection and antibiotics didn't help her. While the detractors in each of these cases may be correct with their specific examples, the exception does not invalidate the general rule of thumb. In fact, the sheer rarity of the exception can actually reinforce the rule itself. We must remember that simply because there is an example that demonstrates an exception doesn't always constitute a refutation. Next, we have the subjectivist fallacy. Today, it is quite common to hear the phrase, that may be true for you, but it is not true for me. This is the quintessential subjectivist fallacy. This fallacy is called the subjectivist fallacy because many who use this erroneous type of argument mistakenly believe that all truth ultimately depends on the subject or the individual. This fallacy rests on a misunderstanding of what constitutes truth, confusing or conflating truth with belief. It is critical that we distinguish between belief and truth. If something is true, then it describes accurately the way things are. As philosopher J.L. Mackie explains, if we do take statements to be the primary bearers of truth, there seems to be a very simple answer to the question. What is it for them to be true? For statements to be true is for things to be as they are stated to be. In contrast to truth, a belief is an opinion or conviction about something. A belief can be true or false. For example, if a person believes that 2 + 2 = 7, then he or she believes a falsehood, not a truth. Simply because one believes something doesn't make their belief accurate. Also, it's important to distinguish between truth and taste or preference. Someone might prefer Nietzsche's writings over Plato's. This is merely a matter of preference, not of truth. Or someone might like the taste of tea over coffee. Again, this is simply one's taste. It's not an issue of truth or falsehood. The subjectivist fallacy is quite commonly used as a mechanism for avoiding taking seriously the views and opinions of others. As critical thinkers, we should not take this easy method of escape. The beliefs and arguments of others should be considered in a serious and analytical manner, and they should be viewed from a standpoint that understands the vital difference between truth and belief. Chapter 5. Damn, look at me. Causal fallacies. First, we have the fallacy of the false cause. The fallacy of the false cause is an argument that assumes there is a causal relation between two events without providing supporting evidence. Events often occur simultaneously or consecutively. However, this doesn't mean they are necessarily related. For example, the Chinese restaurant was robbed Friday night and again Saturday night. Must have been robbed by the same guy. Example number 2. Floods and tornadoes devastated the small town of Green Hills. It's clear a divine being was punishing the town for its non-religious practices. In the first example, the assumption is made that due to the same location of the robberies, the cause of both crimes must be the same. Without further supporting information, however, it's impossible to know if the same criminal was responsible for both events. In the second example, the assumption is made that 2 consecutive events are causally related. But, like the first example, a causal relationship cannot be established. All causal fallacies rest on a misunderstanding of cause and effect. The clearest examples of these are the fallacy of the false cause, the fallacy of the single cause, post hoc ergo propter hoc, and the slippery slope fallacy. These last 3 arguments will be explained next, followed by the gambler's fallacy and the appeal to consequences. But first, we have the fallacy of the single cause. This fallacy is very similar to the fallacy of the false cause described above. In fact, some consider it to be a version of the false cause. The fallacy of the single cause, however, states an event has only one root or reason, when in fact there may be multiple causes. In contrast, the false cause fallacy is erroneous in its assumption of the cause in general. Consider this example of the fallacy of the single cause. Mr. Williams gunned down 3 innocent people because he was on drugs. According to this claim, the cause of the shooting was drugs. However, situations like this are usually multifaceted and complicated. It's highly doubtful drugs were the sole cause of Mr. Williams' crime. Drugs were most likely only one causal component of the complex event. Drugs combined with anger, fear, exhaustion, depression, and or ignorance might be a more accurate explanation. In any case, we simply do not know all of the causal factors involved in this case, so we need to refrain from assuming only one cause. Consider the following example. There's a simple explanation as to why the terrorists attacked us. They hate us. In this argument, the stated conclusion is clearly an oversimplification. Hatred may or may not be one of the causal factors among several, but many other explanations should be considered when discussing terrorism. We must always remember that events often have more than one causal component. Next, we have post hoc ergo propter hoc. Another fallacy of causation. The name of this fallacy translates from the Latin as after this, therefore, because of this. It is also known simply as the post hoc fallacy. This fallacy occurs when one presumes that 2 consecutive but independently occurring events are causally related. In other words, one assumes that because one event happened after another event, the first event must have caused the second. For example, Smith was elected governor in May. In June, crime rates skyrocketed. Clearly, Smith must have caused crime to increase. Example number 2. I lost my wallet the afternoon I kicked my neighbor's cat. Therefore, my unethical act caused me somehow to lose my wallet. Example number 3. My favorite team won after I prayed for a victory. Therefore, prayer works. Like the fallacy of the false cause and the fallacy of the single cause, the post hoc fallacy rests on a misunderstanding of cause and effect. Remember, simply because 2 events occur sequentially, we cannot infer the former event necessarily caused the latter. We must be careful not to project a causal relationship onto unrelated events. Next, we have slippery slope. This fallacy occurs when one erroneously argues that if a certain act or event takes place, it'll necessarily lead to a chain of events ending in a dramatic or disastrous final result. The slippery slope is a fallacy, precisely because we can never know if a whole series of events and or a certain result is determined to follow one event or action in particular. Usually, but not always, the slippery slope argument is used as a fear tactic. Consider these examples. You should not major in philosophy. If you do, you'll never get a good job. You'll lose friends and no one will want to marry you. If you major in philosophy, you'll end up penniless and alone. Example number 2, playing the lottery will lead to gambling addiction, which means losing your house, your spouse, and everything that is precious to you. You'll find yourself homeless on the streets of Las Vegas, begging for change. Example number 3, marijuana is the gateway drug. Using it will lead to cocaine, heroin, and crack. Smoking a joint, before you know it, you'll find yourself with an unquenchable desire for crack. As we can see from these examples, the slippery slope fallacy claims to know the precise causal links and results following a certain event or action. Furthermore, these events usually end in a negative result. Yet, the slippery slope fallacy can also argue for a chain of causal events that necessarily lead to a positive result. For example, call now and purchase your own Hollywood Complete Home Gym system. Once it arrives, you'll be able to work out every day, gaining energy, losing weight, and finally being in control of your life. By making the phone call today, you'll be strong and sexy in just a few months. With this example, it becomes clear the slippery slope can end in one of two extreme places, positive or negative. It should be noted, however, the slippery slope always leads to a dramatic result and always implies the series of events leading to that result necessarily followed from the first action or event. Sometimes a slippery slope fallacy does not include or explain the linking events between the first and final ones. For example, if Barbara rents her house to college students, the property value of the entire neighborhood will drop. Next example. If we allow the government to listen to our phone calls, then before we know it, even our sex lives will be monitored. These two examples are slightly different versions of the slippery slope fallacy. They both follow the same pattern as presented above, but with the implicit assumption of negative causal events rather than a clear presentation of a chain of events. Next, we have the gambler's fallacy. This fallacy of causation occurs when one mistakenly believes an independently occurring event, such as a coin toss, has a causal effect on a separate event, such as a second coin toss. It is named the gambler's fallacy because this type of reasoning is commonly, but not exclusively, found in casinos. For example, if a person wins 3 hands of cards in a row, he or she might think, I'm on a roll. I am sure to continue winning. However, there is not a causal relationship between previous card games and later card games. They are separate and non-causally related. Consider these examples. I bought 3 lottery tickets and the first 2 were winners. I'm sure the third one will be too. Example 2. The Raiders won the last 2 Monday nights. We can safely assume that they'll win next Monday. As seen in the above examples, the gambler's fallacy is often used to predict an upcoming event will be the same as a previous event. However, it's also commonly used to predict the opposite result. Here's some examples. Our first 2 children were boys. This means that our next child will certainly be a girl. Example number 4. I'm sure the Lakers will win their next game. How can I know this? Because they've lost 5 games in a row and they have to break their losing streak soon. The fact that this fallacy can be used to predict opposite results makes its flawed nature glaringly evident. Yet the central issue here is this. The gambler's fallacy, like other causal fallacies, confuses the notion of cause and effect. One must remember that there are 2 types of events, causal and non-causal. A causal event is one in which an action or event necessarily causes a following event, such as a pool cue hitting a billiard ball, causing the ball to roll. A non-causal event is one that has no necessary or predictable following event, such as a winning raffle ticket, fortune teller future wins, or I'm sorry, such as a winning raffle ticket foretelling future wins or losses. Next, we have appeal to consequences. The appeal to consequences is a causal fallacy stating that the truth of a proposition is determined by the negative or positive consequences of that proposition. In other words, this fallacy is committed when one argues a statement must be true or false, depending on whether the consequences are perceived to be good or bad. For example, I know God doesn't exist. Well, what evidence do you have to support this claim? Well, just look at the harm that has been done in the name of God. In this example, Howard does not provide solid premises to support his claim. Instead, he points out that belief in God has had certain negative consequences. However, simply because harm has been done in the name of God doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Likewise, simply because some churches and other religious institutions feed, clothe, and provide shelter for the poor doesn't necessarily mean their religious beliefs are grounded in reality. Consider these examples. Evolutionary theory is correct for many reasons. The strongest evidence for evolution lies in the fact that people who accept this theory are more civilized than those who don't. Next example. I do not believe that corporate media would present false information simply to gain higher ratings. The thought of this is so disturbing and depressing, it cannot possibly be true. In each of these examples, the arguer appeals to the consequences of a particular belief in order to accept or dismiss it. The problem with this type of reasoning is that there is not a causal relationship between the entailments of the truth of a proposition. Consequences often have nothing to do with the truth or falsity of their cause. Chapter 6, some non-Western fallacies. So far, we've considered many logical fallacies and rhetorical techniques originating from the Western intellectual tradition. In the non-Western world, such as China and India, logic has also played a central and foundational role. When studying these traditions, it is fascinating to see that many logical rules, definitions, and systems share far more similarities than dissimilarities with the West, leading one to question the distinction between Western and non-Western logic. In the following, we'll look at 6 logical fallacies from the Nyaya Sutra. I guess that's how you say it. I don't fucking know. One of the oldest and most influential logic texts arising from the Asian continent. So, first we have quibble over metaphor. Quibble over metaphor is a fallacy that occurs when one responds to a metaphor as if it were to be taken literally. It's usually employed as a rhetorical device to avoid taking the position or argument of the interlocutor seriously. It's also often used to dismiss the opponent's claim or position. For example, doctor to his patient. You need to begin listening to your body. Don't overeat, get more sleep, and exercise regularly. 6 months later, doctor to patient. I recommend that you listen to your body, but you continue to live an unhealthy lifestyle. Patient. Well, I've been listening to my body and it hasn't said a damn word to me. Example 2. Albert Einstein once said that religion, art, and science are all branches of the same tree. Einstein was wrong. Religion, art, and science are not natural phenomena like plants and trees. In the first example, the patient responds to the doctor by interpreting "listen to your body" as a crudely literal injunction, using this as a pretext for dismissing the doctor's advice. In the second example, Einstein's metaphor is dismissed as false because the interpreter seems to misunderstand the metaphor by taking it literally. In both cases, the metaphor is misinterpreted, leading to an erroneous conclusion, which is precisely the quibble over metaphor. I just remembered that I'm out of coffee. However, no, I'm not out of coffee. I'm out of sugar. And there's no shot I'm about to make some coffee without sugar. Therefore, I have to go to the grocery store to get some sugar. Not the grocery store, the gas station. There's a gas station up the street that's still open. Because I went there at like 6 something this morning to get some cigarettes. And therefore, They're still open now. I'm just playing. It doesn't necessarily follow. They could have closed early for all I fucking know. I'm just going to assume they're still open. But if not, I guess I'll go to Speedway. I think Speedway's still open. Not 100%. Good news, though. I did get paid today. I didn't think they were going to pay me today. Like, normally, they don't pay you on the holiday. But I got fucking paid today. I was like, oh, shit, that's what's up. Because had I not, I wouldn't have been able to get those cigarettes this morning. But I did. So Dade has a job, lol. I sure fucking do. You know what I mean? And they gave us Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday off. I only had to go to work Monday and Tuesday this week. And we never work weekends. They won't even allow us to work weekends. You know what I mean? Like, I be wanting to just for the overtime. Because if you work weekends, it's overtime straight up. Well, Saturdays. They never let us work Sundays. But Saturdays for sure. But they don't let us do it anymore. But I don't know. They'd probably just being cheap. But I'm gonna pause it right there, you know what I mean? Because I needed to get this sugar for real. So don't y'all forget, man, I do have a merch store, you know what I'm saying? Don't you want to get this shirt? It's dope that the camera just did that. Hell nah. And look at the sleeve, say atheist. You know what I'm saying? It's a dope shirt. Don't it fit me nice? Like, this could be you. You know what I'm saying? That's a fallacy. Just because it fit me nice don't necessarily mean it'll fit you nice. Because we're not the same. You know what I mean? Look, I got on tan pants. You know what I mean? Yeah, who else doing that? Who else doing that on screen? God damn it. That's right. Daniel, don't laugh. What's up, Daniel Cardet? I'll be looking at your comments, son. That's what's up. All right, Big John. I know I'm late, but he said, Dave, you should try to get a job. I already have a job. You should try to typewrite, motherfucker. Book the date is reading and formal logical fallacies. That is correct. Check out Dave's merch. Fuck yeah, man. You said that autofocus. Autofocus. Focus on me, goddamn. It ain't doing it. Ha! Do I gotta point at it for it to be like? I don't know what I'm doing. It's dark in here. The light in here is terrible. It's still terrible, man. But oh well, what are you gonna do? You know what I mean? There's only so many places I can go with this motherfucking microphone. I would like unblur it, but I don't even know how to unblur it. Like, oh, let me go to customization. Oh no, I can't even. It ain't even in here. Yeah, I don't know how to do it at all. Redirect, trailer. No, I don't know about none of that. None of that, son. Oh, let me edit this. Oh, hold on. Use default overlay. Oh, wait, no, I don't want that. Choose a custom overlay for your brakes. I don't have brakes. Overlay for brakes. I don't do brakes. What do you mean? Yeah, I don't know what that is. Well, anyway, yeah, I'm about to get off of here. You know what I mean? I appreciate y'all listening. I'll try to get back on again tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? And read some more. We left off at whatever chapter. Chapter 6. We had chapter 6, page 60. And the next one is quibble over term. But we went over a lot, y'all. Like, I hope y'all learned something. Yeah, we learned about a lot. So, anywho, I'm a oh, I wasn't even that much left. Like, yeah, it's only like 30. It's only like 13 pages left. But I'm still leave it there though. You know what I'm saying? But yeah. I gotta get some sugar, man. I need some coffee. I just got a new coffee pot, and I hadn't been able to try it out yet because I don't have any sugar. I mean, I could have made the thing, but I don't want to make it without sugar. So I ain't gonna bust my head at this gas station for a little bag of sugar. But it's whatever, bro. It's whatever. Merry Thursday. Bro, I want to watch Krampus tonight. I mean, go ahead. You know what I mean? You should totally watch Krampus tonight. So, you know what I mean? But all right then, y'all. I'm going to holler. Yeah.